Okay, today I want us to look at CSS pseudo-classes, pseudo-elements, and CSS variables. What's a pseudo-class? A pseudo-class selects an element based on its state. It chooses one column. It answers questions like, is the mouse hovering over an element? Is the user clicking the element? Is the input focused? That's for a form. Or is it the first child? I know you may have already encountered things like hover. This is a pseudo-class. A pseudo-class does not create a new element. Instead, it styles an element depending on its conditions or its state at that particular time. The syntax for writing this is the selector, then the colon, and then the pseudo-class name. For example, I remember we used nav link, right? Something like that before once. Nav link A, and then we have over. This is pseudo-class. Pseudo-classes are often applied to links or to buttons. Let's use a button. Since we're using button, let's have a button. You can have hover, button hover, or active. So when you have hover, it simply means when the mouse is over an element, styles here should be applied to the element. So when you have active, this applies this CSS rules here when the mouse button is being pressed down on the element. When you are clicking a button or clicking a link, then the styles here will be applied. Sometimes it could be a transform, you scale, and so on. Let's look at an example. Let's have a button. Click me. Sorry. Then we have our button here. Button. Let's use the background color of green. Border 1 pixel solid dark green. Let's give it a color of white. Width 100 pixel. Height of 100 pixels. So when I click it now, nothing is happening. So when you have on hover, you can decide to say, when we are hovering, what do we want the style to be? You say background black and color white. So since the color before is white, you can still leave it as it is. So when we come here and say on hover, we are able to get this. So on click, let's do something else. Let's say button on active, and say background brown. So let's look at this. On hover, when I click, background changes. Have on focus. This is usually used for form input. So let's have a form input there. Let's say input text on focus background pink. So I have this. So on focus, when I click here, the background is pink. So focus visible is actually better for keyboard navigation. When we add focus here, so when I click it now, it's showing because I clicked it. But if I use focus visible, we know the mouse will no longer be able to control this. Only the keyboard can. Only the keyboard can, and which is what we want. This is why we rather use focus visible than use focus. Because for focus visible, for form input, whether it is keyboard or mouse, it will still work. You can also have first child. Also have first child. This one styles only the first child of an element. Let's look at our element here. We have main. This is main. It has one child. It has another child. Form. It has two child. For the sake of this, let's add another button. Second child. So we have two buttons now. Let's move all of this and let's refresh this. So we have two buttons. All buttons that are first child of another element should have the background color of yellow. When we come here and click, you see only this first button. So we can also decide to use last child instead of first, then the last child will be second. Then if we had another button, let's say last child here, then the second will no longer be the last child. Then if we want to style the second child, what do? We can say the nth-child. Nth-child in bracket to say the second child. So in this case, we achieve this. You can say even, all the even children. We still have this. When you say the odd children, odd child, we have this. Let's look at pseudo-elements now. Unlike pseudo-classes, pseudo-elements, they create or style parts of an element, while the pseudo-classes make use of only one colon. The pseudo-element make use of two colons. So the syntax for it is this: the selector, double colon, and then you have the pseudo-element. And this is syntax for pseudo-element. The before element can create a virtual content before an element. Let's say the element is h1. Do we have h1 here? No. Let's have h1. Let's say portfolio. So portfolio. Now, the before pseudo elements and content before the h1 here, and it will always use content. So when we say content, what content do we want to add before the h1? My, and set add something like this, and then I have my portfolio. So I can also do that using this 1F4 6.4. So okay, this looks better. The after, you can also use the after pseudo element. This adds content after the element. Notice that before and after pseudo element must always include the content property. There are other pseudo elements like the first letter. You have first line. So there are other pseudo classes that you're going to come across as time goes on. So lastly, let's look at CSS variables. Let's suppose a website uses the same color everywhere. For example, let's say we have color of royal blue. Then we have, let's say, border color somewhere else. Color of royal blue. Then we have background color somewhere else of the same royal blue. So what now happens when you don't want to use royal blue and you want to use something else like green? Then you now start changing them one after the other all over wherever this royal blue occurs. This is quite time-taking and tedious. Variables allow us to define a value once and reuse it multiple times. Assuming I say I am creating a value and I say primary color, for example, is equal to green, and then I come here and I say use primary color. So if I need to change the primary color from green to royal blue, all I need to do is come here once and just change this to royal blue. Then I will not have to come and be editing each of these. I can decide to use orange. I decide to use anything at this point because this is the container that contains the color and it is the name of the container I am using every other place. So I only have to change the value of this for it to be effective. I don't have to start editing them one after the other. This is the power of variables. Variables are usually created inside the root like this. You use the colon as if it's a pseudo class. Use colon root and then you specify your variables here. And when writing it, you don't write the properties like you usually do. Here, for normal CSS, you write the property like, let's say, background color, and then you put a value of royal blue. But since we are defining variables here, we don't set background color. What we write here now is we say, what is royal blue? Your royal blue is the primary color. So we do primary color, and then this is not just enough. It is underlining it because it doesn't know or recognize primary color as a CSS property. So you have to let it know that it is a variable name, not a CSS property. And how do we do that? You put two hyphen before the variable name, and then we specify secondary name, secondary color. Let's say we use 333. Then let's say we have background color. To shorten it, we just use, let's say, BG color, because here we can afford to use it because this is actually variable name, so we name it. But in order for us to easily understand what they mean, we are writing the names in full, but I don't want to write background color in full because CSS already has a property called background color. So I just shorten to BG color. I can always remember that BG stands for background. So I can have this and say F5, F5, F5. Then border, let's say border radius, let's say 10 pixels. 10 pixels. Then I say spacing of 20 pixels. Now I have created my variables, 5 in number. In essence, I can say I've created a theme, something I can reuse while writing my styles for my web page. Now, the root here actually represents the root element of the document. That's the HTML document. And I remember when we were talking about REM, I did mention that the root is the HTML document. That the HTML here is the root. All these variables I have defined here, they become globally available. Any element within HTML here will be able to make use of this. We have specified the primary color, we specified the secondary color, the background color, the border radius. We've not specified a text color. Let's specify a text color. Let's say instead of using royal blue here, let's use 2563 EB, and then let's have a secondary of 1E293B. Okay, and then we have a background of F5, F5. Okay, let's use F8 FAFC, and then let's use the font color. Let's, instead of calling it font color, let's call it text. So we know this is for text of 111827. So when we're having this as a background color, we want the text to be dark. So we've created a theme now that we can use. So whenever you're designing a website, usually I get the color theme or the color palette from the logo. We can now go ahead to do something like body, say background color. Now, how do we make use of the variables we specified here? That's what we want to look at now. We now use, say, var to say this is a variable, say bg color, and this is what we want. So when we refresh this, we have this. The color has changed. You may not have noticed, it's very subtle, but it has changed. Look at it. Let me refresh again. If you want to really get it, let me use black so that you understand better. You see, the body now has this background color. So we can do this, and then for color, which is text color, they can now use var of text. And then button, let's say we have a button, let's say we have background color var of primary color, then we have color of white, then okay, this is okay. So let's refresh this. We don't have a button yet, so let's have a button. So have this and a button. Then we can decide to have border radius of var border radius. Have this. Now variables are inherited, and they can also be overridden. We can decide to have card. We say card. For our card, let's create another variable here. We call it primary color. I'll say green, which is different from the primary color we have here. We'll now come and say card button. Card button, that is a button that exists inside card. You can decide to give it a background color of variable. When we say variable primary, it doesn't take the primary of the root. Instead, it takes the primary of the direct parent card, because it is inside card. Inside this, let's create a card. And then let's put this button inside of it. Then let's move the style for button for now. So we'll refresh this. So it's showing green and not blue. So let's remove this card here and refresh. It is still showing green. As long as this button is a child of this card, it will always take the variables specified by the card. The reason why we have that card there is to differentiate between this. We have this now, say I am not a card button. I'm a card button. So when we refresh this, this is a card button, this is not a card button. So when we come here, we've not specified background color for the dark button, unless we are coming to do another button again, and we'll save the same thing here. should be here. Then this will remain the same. So otherwise, without that, we see that only the first button has a background color because there's no CSS rule saying that the other button should have a background color. So that is why when we remove this, we'll say background color variable primary color. So while the one inside a card, the card button will take the card variable, the non-card button will take the body variable. So buttons inside the card becomes green. You can always have a fallback. You can always have a fallback. You can decide to say primary color, or if there's no primary color, it should be black. So assuming there is primary color for the two, assuming the root has no primary color, let's remove one letter there, then this one falls to the default. This one has a primary color, but this one doesn't have a primary color. So we now specify a default value for it here. So for any button that doesn't fall on that card or root, of course we know all will fall under root, which is why we usually create all our variables under root, because the root is like a parent element for all of them. CSS variables like this can also be used in internal style. So for we'll be using external style. Let's leave this for a bit. And let's look at the internal style. We have our internal style here. Even inside the internal style, it is the same thing we have done here. We can still do here. We can still create variables like this. The same syntax, everything. There's no difference. So nothing has changed. But for inline style, that is a different thing entirely, which is what I also want us to look at now. For the inline style, you can say this is div class of card. Currently we have no style, so we can decide to add style here in the inline way and say card color, or let's say primary color of green, then let's say color of white. No, let's see, use this color, or let's say text of white. So I am a button. It still has no core because we've created the variables, but we've not made use of them yet. So inside the button, you can decide to say style. We now say style color variable primary color as background color here. And then we'll have this applied. Then we can say color variable of white, which is text. Then this is done. So you can also use this, you can also create variables used in inline style. This is something many people do not know, and many people will not teach you because they do not know, or they do not have the time for it, or it's not usually baked into the curriculum for this sort of thing. We use variables for brand colors when you're creating a brand color for a website, like I said, from maybe a logo or from the organization's color. And for typography, you can have typography here. You can decide to have something like small text. You can have small text, have this specify for small text, let's say 12 pixels, just small text, and let's say medium text, this is for font sizes, so you can have other properties you can add into your variables to create a theme for the variable. You can have border radius, which is what we have done here. You have border radius, you can have shadows, you can have spacing. Spacing, we had a spacing here of 20 pixels, like where we had gap. Can now say a variable of spacing. So this does it. If you remember, we used gap before when we were talking about grid, and we were talking about flexbox, we used gap. Then you can add animation duration, you can add you can create light and dark themes. Okay, so this is all about CSS variables, and this is the end of this lesson. Thank you.